The end of the world is nigh. That's what they say. Here's an article taken from the website New Vision. The end is nigh. Climate, nuclear crises spark fears of the worst. Take a look here. It says, reporting on some interesting comments by that great thinker, Joe Biden, the current president of the United States. Going back to the start of 2022, um, few could have expected at that point the US president speaking of the risk of doomsday following Russia's threats to go nuclear in its invasion of Ukraine. That's how the article starts. In fact, when you look back over the treatment of Russia, when President Obama was in a debate with his opponent in the vote for the presidency, McCain, his opponent, had been talking about foreign policy and referred to Russia. And so Obama stood up, or I think actually he lounged and sat back on something. But anyway, he responded by saying, the 1980s phoned and they want their foreign policy back. He was saying that this was something from the past. Well, it's come back, and it seems to be our future conflict with Russia. And he went on to say, said Joe Biden, in a speech this year, in October this year, last year, in 2022, he said, "We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. He sees that there's a risk of nuclear war. The Global Challenges Foundation, that's a Swedish group that assesses catastrophic risks, warned in an annual report that the threat of nuclear weapons use was the greatest since 1945, when the United States destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in history's only atomic attacks." Now, this threat of nuclear war by nuclear bomb has been around for some time, and it was certainly a big threat in the 80s, which Obama, as I said, looked back to during his presidential campaign. Yes, then it was a threat then, and it's come back now. Back in the 80s, we used to have that doomsday clock. Not sure that's still around. Reasonably recently it was, where you'd have this clock which got nearer and nearer to midnight, and at midnight there'd be a nuclear war, and it would be moved closer or further away from midnight, depending on what the perceived threat was. Yeah, that was a big threat back then, and it's come back. Now, climate catastrophe was seen as a big threat back in the day as well. In the 1970s, it was thought to be global cooling. There's been a big move now, it seems, to try and hush that up. No, people never saw that. They did. There were papers published on it, and it was widely disseminated in mainstream media. Leonard Nimoy, played Spock in the Star Trek series, so I guess he was employed to give a sort of a scientific flavour to what was being said. He said that there was likely to be a loss of crops. There was going to be huge food shortages because of global cooling. Well, now we switch to global warming, but global warming is seen as being the big threat. There's going to be an apocalypse, the end of the world coming up. Well, these sort of ideas have been around for a long time. It seems that people are always expecting the end of the world. And these predictions never quite happen as predicted. The nuclear weapons never get released. The famines do arrive, but they don't kill off everyone. And well, famines due to global cooling didn't arrive. We then went into a brief period of global warming, and then there was a hiatus, an unchanging global temperature for about 20 years. It's gone up slightly recently, certainly in the Western world, the Northern Hemisphere, Western world, because of the effects of the El Nino wind movements, movements of pockets of air, well, big pockets of air, balloons of air. I don't know. Anyway, movements of of air in the over the Pacific. causing an increase in temperature. Interesting, that same sort of phenomenon caused the cooling that we've seen in Britain in the first half of the winter here. Uh, it's been a period of great cooling, yet no one is crying out, global cooling's happening. When we get hot periods, people say there's global warming happening. Is the global warming happening overall? Yes, the evidence points to the globe being warmed, but not to the catastrophic um, level that these prophets of doom of the green movement are saying is going to hit the world, impact the world. I remember some time ago being told that the war was going to end in 12 years, but I can't remember what that was now, but we must be about halfway through it. The world, it seems, is always going to end. People are calling for it. The end of the world is nigh, and the Bibles are being used to justify this. The end of the world is nigh. But although the end of the world is predicted in the Bible, it's said that the world rather will be renewed. Though there's the old earth, then there'll be a new heaven and a new earth. So uh, it's debatable whether you say the earth is going to be destroyed or whether it's going to be renewed. Uh, but in any case, it does look to a catastrophic event in which things are going to be changed and the old things are going to be swept away. When talking about this in the Bible, though, rather than saying what is normally said about it. Let me just call this up. Rather than saying what is normally said about it, that you can tell looking at signs out in the world around scientific and political signs that the world's going to end. Mark 13:32 says, "But concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." Now, this is talking about the return of Jesus. Now, Jesus did return in power. He came in power, that he arrived at the throne of God, having been resurrected, he arrived at the throne of God. He died on the cross, spent some time on earth, and then went up to heaven. And when he was there, when he arrived there in heaven, he set about uh, sending the Roman armies to destroy Jerusalem. Now, I think that is what is being talked about here, the event that people don't know what the day or the hour is. In the context, that's what's meant. But we can use this prophecy, which was fulfilled in that attack on Jerusalem, to point to what will happen at the end of all things, that we don't know exactly when it's going to happen. And actually, in Matthew's gospel, it gives us an indication, a very clear indication, in fact, of what it is that's meant to happen. And that is this, that is in Matthew 24 and Matthew 24 and verse 24. Let me just, for those of you watching the video version of this, I'll just change the way this is displayed so that you can see it properly. Here we are, Matthew chapter 24 and verse 24. "And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." You see, there's a job to be done. The gospel of the kingdom refers to the good news. Gospel means good news, and the good news proclaimed is that Jesus is Lord. Jesus is the true King. Jesus, the Prince of Peace, is the King, and this needs to be proclaimed. Peace needs to be proclaimed. The importance of peace, of restoration, of relationships between humans and between humans and God must be put into place, because Jesus is Lord, and he's able, in fact, to discipline those who won't do it, discipline whole nations. Remember what I said about what that prediction back in Mark 13:32 was about? There it is, concerning that day or the hour, no one knows. What was that? What that was happening? That was Jesus sending Roman armies, armies who didn't believe in him at all, to come and discipline, at that point, the Jewish people. Not all the Jewish people, the leaders in Jerusalem and not Jewish people throughout all time. In fact, Jewish people, as the holders of the oracles of God, of the scriptures which they handed on, are to be treated with great honor and respect. I'm not saying all Jewish people in this context. I'm saying the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem were disciplined because they had rejected Jesus. And they were disciplined because they weren't accepting the Prince of Peace. In fact, they were going for war rather than peace. And Jesus, in this case, was very much against that. I believe there is such a case as a just war where you just have to fight. But in general, Jesus is for no war and certainly heading for peace as soon as is legitimately possible. So Jesus is Lord right now, and he will return in power to set things to right. But that doesn't mean that the end of the world, the entire world, is nigh now. Because, well, we have to get on with things. The gospel needs to be proclaimed before the end will come. So we've got a job to do. Let's get on with it. Tell everyone you know. Let's organize and tell people clearly and present the news irrefutably that that Jesus is Lord, Jesus is the true King, and that we need to get our act in order. We need to sort ourselves out. We need, as nations, to stop having unnecessary wars, and we need, as people, to be loving and caring and forgiving with each other. The gospel needs to be proclaimed that Jesus, the Prince of Peace, is the one in charge, and he commands peace.